Hello and welcome. I'm Peter, and we're here to make progress, not perfection. But on that way to progress, we are still trying to find more and more ways to improve. So today I'm going to give you the top 5 mistakes that are made in the orange ranks. Now, there are still a lot of the same repeated mistakes in the orange ranks that I covered previously in the top 5 yellow rank mistakes video, which you can find in the upper right-hand corner right here. So don't think that just because I don't mention something from the past videos that I've done that orange rank players are exempt from those mistakes. Because they're not. Moving on, today we're going to look at some new mistakes. Counting down from number 5, we have players frame trapping themselves. This is most commonly seen when players are trying to press a button after one of their attacks are blocked. As a general rule, if you don't know how minus your attack is on block, or if the attack you're throwing out does not have an extension on it afterwards, do not immediately press a button. Most attacks in the game, not all, most, are generally minus on block. If you get your attack blocked and it wasn't something like a generic down forward 1, jab, or something plus on attack, don't press a button. Pressing a button after an attack is blocked is by far one of the easiest ways to walk into a counter hit. Let's take a look at some examples. Up first, we have Doug Speed. He's playing Lee against a random Brian player. Doug Speed goes for down back 4, aka Blazing Kick, and it gets blocked. Now, Blazing Kick is actually a very good attack since it can provide Lee with some big damage and is a class 1 launcher, along with it being a follow-up for some of Lee's options. Though this attack is minus 15 on block.
NANI?!
But it does have some pushback, so punishing it sometimes can be very difficult. Doug Speed here, after he gets his Blazing Kick block, he should really just be holding back block, hoping that his opponent misses the 15 frame punish. But instead, he presses a button at minus 15 frames and gets counter hit by back 1. If he were to just not press a button, hold back, and hope for the best, all that would have happened is he would have blocked a back 1 here, not eaten a full counter hit combo. Next up, we have a duel in crime, G-Man and Kolkas. Both of these guys play Dragunov, and both of them are frame trapping themselves with Dragunov's slide attack, quarter circle forward 3. Now, allow me to elaborate this a little bit. Most attacks in this game are plus frames on hit. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule, as there are some attacks that are minus frames on hit. Dragunov's slide, for example, quarter circle forward 3 is minus frames on hit. To be precise, it is minus 6 on hit, which means we really should not be pressing a button here. For both players, they are pressing buttons after slide, and sometimes they get away with it. Other times, not so much. If we're using an attack that is minus on hit, we should probably be prepared to block afterwards immediately and not be pressing buttons. Doing so could result in some unwanted counter hits. Number 4, we have players not punishing or even attempting to punish attacks that they block. Let's be real for a moment. This game has a lot of attacks. Some attacks are very minus on block, to the point that they're launch punishable. Other attacks are only slightly minus on block and are only moderately punishable, and others are barely punishable because they're at just minus 10. And other attacks still are safe on block, with some being even plus on block. So it's fucking hard to figure out what attacks are punishable and what are not. However, I do wholeheartedly believe that orange ranks is where players should start to learn character matchups that includes what attacks are punishable and what attacks are not. As a general rule, if you are in a match and not sure if something is launch punishable or block punishable, just try throwing out your 10 frame punish, alright, when you block something. Getting a minor punish is generally going to be better than no punish most of the time. Now, I realize some attacks are safe on block and others are plus on block, but oftentimes you won't learn this until you have at least tried it out. If you block something, at least try your 10 frame punish, and if it doesn't work or it results in you getting counter hit, then obviously at least, hey, I've learned from this. Hey, this attack is safe on block, or hey, this attack is plus on block. Learning as you play can sometimes be some of the best types of learning that one can possibly experience. So next time you're playing and you block an attack you're not sure of, just try throwing out your 10 frame punish. You might see if it works or not, and you just might be pleasantly surprised. Oh, and if you ever block a stagger low, a low that does this, yeah, make sure to launch this, because every character in the game has a launch for these types of attacks. Coming in at number 3 is players developing bad habits with strings. Now there are a lot of strings in the game and there are a lot of good ones too. Like for instance, Kings 2-1, Jacks 2-1, Bombs back 1-2, Jins back 2-1, Devil Jins while standing 1-2, and Lee's back 1-1. These are some examples of good strings because they cannot be punished on block because they're completely safe, and they end with a mid, which means they cannot be ducked. So these are examples of good strings to throw out and use. However, it seems that players have begun to pick up on the bad habit of throwing out bad strings. For example, Noctis's back 1-2, Brian's quarter circle back 2-4, and Steve's back 1-2, and Dragunov's back 4-2-1. Okay, these strings I just listed as examples are not exactly bad because they don't have a use. They absolutely do, but rather they're bad to just YOLO and randomly throw out there. Each of these strings has a very specific purpose and one glaring weakness. Let's start with the specific purposes of each of these strings. Noctis's back 1-2. This attack is primarily used as a 12 frame block punisher. It does great damage and deals very good frames on hit. Secondarily, it can be used as a fast whiff punisher because of the speed and range at which it comes out at. Brian's quarter circle back 2-4. This attack is primarily used as a long range whiff punisher because of how long the quarter circle back 2 reaches. Secondarily, it can be used as a counter hit bait, but this should only be used if you notice the opponent is completely disrespecting the last hit of quarter circle back 2-4. Steve's back 1-2. This attack is primarily used as a block punisher for -13 frame attacks. It deals good damage and also leaves Steve at huge frames of advantage on hit. Secondarily, it can be kind of used as a situational whiff punisher, but generally speaking, the best whiff punisher for Steve is still going to be his Sonic Fang, down forward 1+2. Dragunov's back 4-2-1. This attack has one and only one use, and it's to be used sparingly as part of his stagger string pressure. The mind game that comes with this is whether the string will be stopped halfway or whether it will be finished is something a good Dragunov should really try to capitalize on every now and then. Alright, so now that we've covered these uses of the moves, let's take a look at the one glaring weakness that each of them share. All of these strings, which make them bad to YOLO and just randomly throw out there, is that the second hit, if the first hit is a blocked attack, is that it can be ducked. This is by far the main reason these attacks should not just be randomly thrown out and overly abused. I know most of you guys in the orange ranks are using these attacks and your opponents are not crouching and launch punishing you for these, but this can be a false sense of security in using these attacks. Just be aware that this bad habit will be something of a ticking time bomb. You will eventually progress to the point of becoming a better player, and when you do, attacks like this will be ducked and launch punished. When that day comes, it will be very difficult, very difficult to break this habit of not using these types of attacks randomly. My advice for these safe on block, low high or high high or mid high attacks is to either use them super sparingly or not at all on the neutral. This will prevent bad habits from forming that will later bite you in the ass. The number 2 mistake that players are making is autopiloting setups. After reviewing the games from the orange ranks, it appears that players are getting much better at creating these setups and often relying way too much on them, with specific sequences of attacks that are strung together that they always do. This is super dangerous. Some of you guys have yet to be punished for this. Other of you guys have been punished for this, but regardless, this is a warning to all of you. Do not rely too heavily on setups. Solid gameplay such as spacing, block punishing, movement, whiff punishing, sidestepping, all of these great things will always be useful and work. Meanwhile, setups on the other hand will work once in a while, but will definitely fall off in usefulness once the opponent has become more used to these setups. Let's take a look at some viewer examples. First up, we have Scaby, a Jin player. Scaby performs 1-2-3 into up forward 2. It doesn't work, so then moments later he tries it again and again. Something like Jin's 1-2-3 into up forward 2 is very good because it does catch any opponent who's attempting to retaliate immediately. However, this Master Raven player is patient, which Scaby hasn't caught on to. So he tries to force this setup over and over and over again. Some players might be looking at this setup and be thinking, well, what's really the danger here? Jin is completely safe after up forward 2 anyway, so why not just do this? Well, I want you guys to consider this. After 1-2-3, Jin is at 0 frames of advantage, which means Jin doesn't have the advantage, neither does Master Raven. But anytime we do this up forward 2 afterwards, we're effectively taking this 0 frames of advantage and then tacking on a -7 because up forward 2 is -7. Then we're effectively ending our turn and handing it over to the opponent. So instead of adapting to what our opponent is doing, we're just autopiloting the setup and putting ourselves at -7 every single time. Next, we have an example from Turk. Turk, for the most part, is actually a fairly solid orange rank Devil Gym player. However, he has one or maybe two setups that he really likes, which is jab into down back 2 or jab jab into down back 2. While on the surface, it doesn't seem like much of a setup, and it is very benign, but it can be super dangerous. Aside from doing jab into down back 2 or jab jab into down back 2, Turk rarely performs Devil Jin's down back 2 anywhere else. This makes the timing of down back 2 very predictable and easy to low parry. So those of you who keep getting your unseeable lows parried every single time you try to do it, see if you are autopiloting something else before the unseeable low. Usually this is the case. Now, there are a lot more setups that people were doing that I obviously can't spend the time to go through every single one of them and explain to you in detail why it was bad, so I'll just call out some of the viewers who did submit footages that I saw the autopiloting in, and hopefully those of you in the audience watching this can benefit from knowing which setups are bad and briefly why they're bad. First up, we have Empyrean. Do not autopilot forward 3 into Scarecrow 4. This is a very common tactic and is launch punishable. Don't do it. Hedrexor, do not autopilot back 1 with Steve into Flicker back 2. This is duckable and launch punishable on that second hit. G-Guardian, don't autopilot Negan's forward 2 into up back 2. This is launch punishable, obviously, and you can get counter hit out of it before the up back 2 gets to do anything. Kokis, do not autopilot 2-1 into down forward 1-4. This makes ducking down forward 1-4 very easy. And Rawflow, every single time you do a down forward 1, you follow it up with another down forward 1-2. This is predictable, vary your timing. Mistake number 1. The number 1 mistake that players are making in the orange ranks is not learning or understanding character matchups. This is kind of a giant umbrella catch-all mistake that is made in the orange ranks. So hear me out. In my books, prior to the orange ranks, so the yellows, the greens, and the teals, I don't think it's super important to learn about character matchups, as I think it's better to spend time learning how your character plays and what makes them strong. However, that only gets you so far until you have to start dealing with your opponent's characters, right? The biggest misconception about people labbing character matchups is you gotta learn all the strings, you gotta learn all the various attacks that the opponent can use. Yeah, that stuff is important, but there are other more broad concept things that are even more important. The 2 most important things that you can possibly learn when learning a matchup is 1, which direction should you generally be sidestepping and sidewalking to avoid the majority of attacks or key attacks that the opponent is performing. For example, in the case of fighting against Armor King, you should probably be sidestepping and sidewalking like a madman to the right. So sidestep, sidewalk right. Against Lee, you should probably be sidestep, sidewalking to the left. Against Fang, same story, sidestep, sidewalk to the left. I could keep going with examples, but I think you guys get the idea. generally speaking, most characters have a particular weak side that they have most of their moves tracked to. Do the characters have moves that track to their weak side? Absolutely, but you're looking for general broad concept things that you can apply to a specific matchup very quickly. The second big broad arching concept that players need to understand is how to be playing the matchup. Most characters have a general game plan that they would like to follow. For example, I'll talk about Brian here. Generally speaking, Brian wants to use his excellent keep out tools and play at the mid-range as much as possible because of his average sidestepping, average backdashing, and less than stellar poking tools, right? So against characters like Kazumi, Steve, Law, Xiaoyu, Shaheen, Lucky Chloe, and a bunch of other characters, playing at the mid-range is the preferred spacing because it's going to be really hard for you to out-poke some of the best pokers in the game. You can afford to play more defensively in these types of matchups, especially if you have the life lead. However, that strategy doesn't translate over to all the characters in the cast. Some characters like Jack, Noctis, Eddie, Kuma, Gigas, and a couple of others, you actually want to be the aggressor because their keep out and their range is actually better than yours. So instead of playing more defensively and using your keep out tools at the mid range, you probably want to be laying on the pressure as much as possible against those characters and backing off occasionally and then getting back in. Once you figured out these two aspects of a matchup, which way to generally be sidestepping and sidewalking, and how your character should be playing the matchup, then it's time to start moving into the lab with the various attacks and strings. Now, I've already made a video on this, so you can feel free to check it out here in the upper right hand corner. I'll link a card to it, and I'll also leave a link in the description and the comments of this video as well. But the process of learning to deal with the assortment of strings and attacks can be a very long and arduous, boring process if you don't like labbing. So I can guarantee you that though, if you watch my video that I link here, you will be able to cut your training time down to dealing with this kind of stuff probably by 30%. So these were the top 5 mistakes made in the orange ranks that I didn't want to repeat from the yellow, the green, and the teal ranks, but those mistakes were still being made. For example, players not punishing hop kicks, players not sidestepping and sidewalking enough, players not utilizing their key moves, and etc, etc. Those mistakes were still being made in the orange ranks, but I didn't want to just rinse and repeat the same things over and over again. Up next, top 5 mistakes made in the red ranks. Thanks for watching, guys, and joining me on this video. Also, thank you so much, patrons, for your ever so gracious support. Without you, this would have not have been possible. And if you're new here and you like what you see, consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon. Below in the descriptions, as always, I also have my links to my Discord, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon page. See ya next time.